Following up Battletanx would have been a tough task for those quirky lot at the 3DO company. When the first game in the series hit store shelves, the game was one of the surprises of the year. The action-packed arcade style resonated with gamers, offering both a solid single-player mode and a multiplayer mode which is still one of the most satisfying experiences on the N64. Unfazed by the surprising position they found themselves in, the 3DO company quickly set about putting together the sequel to Griffin Spade's adventures in the war-torn post-apocalyptic future. After he saved the world and his woman in the first game, they took control of San Francisco and ensured that peace was maintained and order restored. As life became easier, they had a small child who has caught the attention of the Queen Lord Cassandra. The story begins as her army invades San Francisco with an aim of kidnapping the child and taking control of the area. With an army of like-minded allies, you enter the battleground once more, and with the help of your comrades try to take her down. The problem is that Queen Lord Cassandra has mind control abilities which turns your army against you. Your family are too powerful to be under her control, and so you're instead left to escape and regroup, and then begin your worldwide chase which sees you leave the United States and venture across into Europe. So the story is a big step up from the first game, which is much more in-depth and adds some important storyline points to keep you caring about the characters. It doesn't get too serious, but retains the same corny tone as the first game, which for many people, myself included, loved very much. Aside from the single player campaign which can now be played co-op, the classic game modes return with some welcome new additions. The single player mode takes in 17 levels, but the multiplayer is where many of you will no doubt have classic memories. Setting this game apart from the first game is the huge amount of destruction which is now possible in Global Assault. Pretty much any building you can see in the game can be levelled with some well placed shots. Certain buildings in the first game were indestructible due to level design, but this time you feel a greater sense of freedom when tackling the levels. If you want to play the game with stealth, then you can use buildings for cover and protection, only turning corners to take pot shots at distant enemies. On the other hand, if you want to go all out war, then you can go through buildings to reach enemies, and simply taking down buildings which stand in your way. It sounds minor, but when playing the game it gives a surprising amount of not only freedom but replayability, as you use trial and error to establish the best method of attack. The first game consisted of two different level designs. You'd have zones which were pretty much square arenas, and these were mixed up with bridge levels where you'd need to go from one end to the other without being blown up. This time around, whilst these concepts remain unchanged, there are slight differences. The bridge style levels, for example, often have different areas linked together through tunnels. This breaks up the basic point-to-point run and gives you the chance to take stock, rearm yourself, and then enter the next segment to do battle. The basic square zones of the first game are also changed, as these maps are now more detailed, complex, and often feature various different areas tying in with the scenery. For example, when you reach the Houses of Parliament in London, you can follow the roads to the main entrance where a huge battle kicks off. Alternatively, you can take your enemies by surprise by blasting down one of the many walls and taking them down from behind. Yet again, the choice of tank also plays a key part. There are a number of different craft for you to choose for certain circumstances. Take the Goliath tank for example, perfect for areas of heavy firepower, but it's slow, so if you need quicker movement, you'd select the motor tank, which can be blown up in a single shot but gives you unprecedented speed. The game also ventures onto the seas this time around, with select levels taking place on water, in the M2 Hydra tank or on the hover tank, which can tackle land and sea. Get to grips with these in the single player mode, because knowledge of how they work best is invaluable when playing with friends. In the single player mode, it should also serve you well, as some levels give you allies, and seeing what tank is being controlled will give you an idea of your expected role in the overall battle. The arsenal this time around is much more balanced. Sure, the nuke still obliterates every friend, foe and building in the vicinity, but the remaining set of mines, rockets and lasers give you a much more rounded feel to the game. There's no single weapon that you can use in all situations, and so managing your ammo is key in the final missions. When handling the game, the same control scheme applies as the first game, but in Global Assault everything runs much more smoothly. There were one or two moments of slowdown in the first game, and these have almost entirely been ironed out. The game handles a lot more quickly than that of the first game too, and even with numerous tanks, explosions and buildings falling down, the engine barely struggles with all this action. Visually, the game's come forward in leaps and bounds too. The textures are now much crisper and signs and logos are more detailed. The tank models are also much more ferocious looking and look like real terror machines instead of somewhat muddy looking blocks they had previously been in the first game. Explosions and effects have also been improved, and although still somewhat pixelated, the levels of destruction are much more appealing and have a higher level of polish than I was expecting. One area in particular that I would have liked to have seen more improvements on is the entire sound suite. Sure, there's still no voice samples to go along with the cutscenes, and so you're still left with imagining Griffin Spade's gravelly tones in your mind. The soundtrack sounds very reminiscent of the first game, and although it's a new score, they did stick with what they know best, and so the slightly grungy rock tones are back. It fits in with the gameplay, but you won't be remembering it months or even weeks after playing the game. Third-party games on the N64 often get a bad rap. The old saying is that people buy Nintendo consoles for Nintendo games, but that's something of a discredit to some excellent titles which have always been available. Battletanx Global Assault falls into this category in my opinion. It's a third-party game that was released to please an audience that loved the previous game and to try and pick up some new fans along the way. It doesn't break from the basic formula that worked so well in the first game, and yet it adds enough features and tweaks to make it one of the console's must-own titles. After a response to my first Battletanx review, it seems that many of you love this series as much as I do. With this game coming out in 1999, I'd love to hear your thoughts on why we didn't get a third chapter in the Battletanx series on the Nintendo 64. The 3DO company didn't go bankrupt until 2003, and so I've often wondered why, even since then, that the series hasn't gotten a follow-up given the popularity of the franchise. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and until next time.